I cannot begin to unpack how shocking it is that we're actually getting a standard 5-star selector in Genshin Impact. Shoot, finally. I've wanted Tighnari for almost 2 years, man. Yet naturally, we're all gonna want to make the best choice possible. So today, I thought it'd be neat to delve into all the different standard 5-star character choices that we have at our disposal, and discuss which one you should think about choosing based on your current account setup. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. I want to open up with Dehya because of all the buffs that Natlan is going to provide her. Finally, after years of Dehya coping, Hoyo finally answered our desperate prayers and made Dehya a competent character. So why did Dehya get buffed? A few things. First off, among the new artifact sets that we're getting, Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City, what a cool name by the way, is gonna be great on Dehya in Natlan teams. All elemental damage involved in triggering a reaction gets buffed by 12%. She doesn't have any Night Soul, so she can't trigger the other 28%, but this still provides Dehya with some solid buffing capabilities that she didn't have before. Why not round it out and do 10% and 30%? Makes it more flexible for non-Natlan teams, I suppose. For the record, elements involved means that if Hydro and Pyro are both used in creating a reaction, both of those damage types get buffed. Yes, this applies to Dendro for burning, so on the whole, that's a pretty unique way to provide damage bonus percent for many different kinds of teams. So Dehya has finally expanded what her presence in a team is capable of doing in a very positive way, which is excellent. And if any of you feel like this isn't really a quote-unquote buff to Dehya, one of Animo's biggest claims to fame is 4-piece Viridescent Venerer. An amazing artifact set like this absolutely does matter, especially when it affects Dehya's meta viability this positively. Secondly, Dehya's team options are simply way larger than before. Emily was already an excellent concession to her, but now with Mualani coming out, she's going to be an excellent defensive option in Mualani teams. Not to mention how in the future, I can see her possibly having a use case of Kinich. The fact that she can actually be supportive with the Night Soul set also brings Dehya much more flexibility in general, and I wouldn't be surprised to see her fit very comfortably into future Natlan teams as well. Thirdly, Dehya can actually be a solid DPS if you have her C1 thanks to Farina. Usually it's only a 1-2% damage increase to Dehya over a 2-piece set, but Farina makes it a more significant damage increase. So to be fair, Dehya's been buffed for quite a while, but Natlan is really shaking her up. Dehya's C1 is such a solid increase to her as she builds quite the hefty amount of HP and makes her a very solid DPS. So if you have her at C0 and we're thinking of building her as a DPS or simply trying her out again, picking up C1 isn't a bad idea at all either. Now for another excellent choice to make in my opinion, Jean. We'll talk about what she offers at base first, and then delve into how much constellations improve her. Being an amazing Farina healer is such a darn good quality in this day and age. She has access to so many crazy solid Farina comps, it's wild. Double Hydro, Xiao, and Sunfire are the immediate examples that come to my mind. But anywhere you need a Farina healer, Jean can tag along too. Plus, being able to hold 4-piece Viridescent Venerer is an amazing bonus to Jean, and if you're not down for that, 4-piece Noblesse works very nicely in teams where 4-piece VV wouldn't be as useful, such as Xiao teams with a low investment Farina, because the attack percent buff would still be nice and meaty. Being able to hold the Favonius sword is another nice touch. She's also extremely useful if you don't have Xianyun, who is essentially Jean++ plunge powered. However, I will be honest, if you already own a C0 Xianyun and are deciding whether C0 Jean is worth it, maybe not. I only think it's worth using Jean even if you own Xianyun if your Jean is C2+. Jean has two main things over Xianyun in my opinion, cleansing elemental auras and Bennett Jean Sunfire, which is very good for consistent pyro application and elemental swirling. We haven't had an abyss that bricks us with weird debuffing auras in forever now, so the cleansing feels very situational, though she is the only character who can cleanse in this way, so keep that in mind. Jean Sunfire is pretty neat for teams that have a bunch of reactions and want to have all that pyro application, or if you're a filthy whale such as myself, then Sunfire feels insanely good in C6 Farina Vape. Another thing she has over Xianyan is being able to launch away trash mobs, and her special theater stage shows this off too, but in complete honesty, it's more of a fun gimmick as opposed to anything else, and doesn't have the wonderful overworld convenience that Xianyan's sky ladders do, though tapping the skill is a great source of elemental particles for batterying characters such as Xiao. I do want to mention how Jean becomes quite formidable with constellations, however. She has one of the better standard character constellation lineups. I myself am fortunate enough to have a C6 Jean, so let's go through this together, why don't we? Starting with C1, the bigger suck isn't a massive quality of life change, but it's pretty neat. C2's movement speed is relatively niche, but in Wanderer teams, it's actually quite appreciated. C4 is the one that I really wanted to talk about. 40% res shred for Animo is insane. Fantastic for all my fellow Xiao simps in the audience, actually wild. This is Jean's most impressive constellation. It's made even more impressive by the fact that it's double of Navia's C4, who is a limited 5-star character, whereas Jean is standard. Sucks for Navia though, damn. Either way, this makes her a really amazing specialist for Animo teams and pretty good for mono Animo setups. C6 is completely defensive, but considering how annoying and hard-hitting bosses like the Copper Duo are, for instance, this is a nice quality of life con if you use your Jean very often. So Jean goes from a 4-piece VV holding support with lots of Farina synergy to a unit who can also excellently support Animo DPSs, which she can already do at base thanks to batterying 4 Noblesse and healing, by the way. And while a lot of her value is negated by Xianyan, do note that Xianyan is more plunge-tailored anyway, supporting characters such as Diluc and Gaming, whereas Jean can cook in teams like Raiden Double Hydro and take full advantage of her kit, whereas Xianyan's plunging aspect is wasted in a team like that. Definitely consider who you're picking Jean for if you're interested in her, because while she is a very good unit, she does work better in some teams than others. With that being said, Jean's overall a very solid choice. Then for the character that I'll personally be choosing, Tighnari. He's a very good sprint DPS that has somehow avoided my account for 2 whole years. The guy can hold the very common 4-piece Wanderer's Troop, which many of you should already have pretty good pieces of by now. His bow options are pretty much just any 5-star bow that you've got, and most craftables will work fine with him. He is outclassed by Alhaizim if it's a Dendra DPS that you're looking for, but if you don't have or want him, or perhaps you want a character that's more focused on spread, then Tighnari is the right man for the job. It's also worth mentioning that this lad works quite well with Yai Miko, so if you're a Yai simp, then your pink fox lady may work pretty nicely with the green fox boy. There isn't much he's getting with Natlan's release, so I don't have much to add here. He really is just a neat Dendra DPS that will fulfill your every spread-based need. I'd say that since we only have 2 Dendra DPSs in the entire game right now, soon to be made 3 when Kinich eventually comes out, Tighnari may also be worth your time simply because he offers a rarer playstyle. This is also good for Imaginarium Theater as well, especially considering that he doesn't share primary teammates with Alhaitham and Kinich. Nahida sharing might be a bit awkward, but he can still definitely function without. Only big con is that Hunter's Path, his best in slot, was last seen on the Chronicled Wish, which doesn't really have a fixed schedule of rotation, so for all we know, it could be ages until we next see his Sig. Either way, a good choice. Keqing is an interesting one. She's mostly a Fischl driver and aggravate due to being able to proc Fischl's A4s very quickly in the team, thanks to the sheer amount of Electro that Keqing applies in very quick succession. While this is indeed a great Keqing team, it certainly isn't the best aggravate team. We have so many better aggravators in Genshin now, to the point where Keqing in particular isn't really all that special. She is good, don't get me wrong, but she's more of a character that you build if you happen to lose the 50-50. If you already have her built, then she services aggravate teams well enough to the point where while upgrading to Chlorand or Yai Miko is large, Keqing can still handle them competently enough. But I'm sure there are plenty of you out there that own a Chlorand or Yai Miko, but no Keqing. In this case, don't waste your choice on Keqing. Chlorand does indeed have many other teams, but Chlorand Aggravate beats out Keqing Aggravate by quite a large margin. Plus, it's not even like the playstyles are that different on a surface level. Yes, they're obviously different, but what I mean is that both are extremely quick-fire units. So if you own the Champion Duelist, there is extremely little incentive to chase the Yuhong. Yai also takes care of Aggravate very competently, though her playstyle is a lot more slow-paced compared to Keqing if that matters to you at all. If it does, then be my guest and pick up Keqing, but Yai's damage is way better in Aggravate compared to Keqing. Not to mention how that since Yai plays very well within Spread Tighnari, if you're looking to expand the roster of Dendra units that you can use, you might as well go for him instead if you already own Yai Miko. So while Keqing is indeed very serviceable, I have a hard time recommending her because we simply have far better options now. You shouldn't be devastated if you lose to Keqing or anything, especially if you have no aggravate units already, as she is still a very solid standard unit. Yet with that being said, you shouldn't go out of your way to obtain Keqing specifically. There are far stronger teams for new players if you're thinking of it from that angle, and might I remind you that not everybody has Fischl C6. Dude, mine is still C3, and I've been playing this game daily almost every day since the start of 2.1. And I'd say we have enough cheap 4-star Electro options to the point where picking Keqing specifically for Imaginarium Theater would feel a bit redundant. Diluc's an interesting one. He's not that insane with that Xianyun, just a standard, no pun intended, I swear guys. Pyro main DPS that isn't very mechanically challenging. The ingredients on the back of a cereal box are more complex to read compared to Diluc's kit. The guy's extremely straightforward to face, and pretty much any other Pyro DPS under the sun outperforms this guy for assuming no plunging shenanigans. However, with plunging shenanigans, he shoots up way higher on the meta totem pole. Plunge Vape Diluc of Xianyun takes advantage of Diluc's Absorb Plunge scalings, which can honestly yield some extremely impressive DPS numbers out of him. The main argument against Diluc is that while this tactic is powerful, C6 Gaming does more damage, so if you're fine to put up with that boy Gaming's playstyle, then he will service you better. Not to mention how teammates that Diluc uses such as Farina, Bennett, and even Xianyun herself are very highly contested in other very powerful meta modern teams, and units like Arlecchino negate the need for another Pyro DPS. Also, if you have a well-built Hu Tao, Pyro Plunge Hu Tao does more DPS than Pyro Plunge Diluc. Arlecchino can also Plunge Vape. I'm not exactly sure why you'd want to do that, but you can. So if you own any of those popular DPSs, then Pyro Plunge Diluc's value does drop down quite a bit. It'll obviously beat the likes of Yoimiya, but that's not a very hard thing to do. The bar, if you will. So while Diluc does indeed have this very powerful team, and he's so straightforward to understand that somebody with only a quarter of their brain could probably learn to play him, you'd be playing Plunge Vape Diluc to make Diluc good, not to outperform all of the other Pyros or something else crazy ambitious like that. With that being said, if you don't have any good Pyro DPS and you choose to build Plunge Vape Diluc, he's a great choice that will service you very well. Gaming may negate his value, though remember that Imaginarium Theater exists and Diluc isn't locked to plunge only. I will say that he is a pretty expensive first DPS compared to somebody like a Hytham or Nervalette, for example, who require very little investment to hit the ground running in the Spiral Abyss, whereas Diluc does want quite a lot of resources and limited 5-star characters poured into him in order for the guy to work. But comparing anybody to Nervalette is just unfair, and Hytham has the power of Dendro on his side, so yeah. Great first DPS choice that is fairly replaceable later down the line. His numbers will still hold up pretty well in Plunge Vape for older players, and even when he gets replaced, he'll still find use on your account via Imaginarium Theater. Mona is a character that in the modern days oftentimes relegated to only being used for whale unit nuke showcases, and even then, she keeps messing up my C6 Farina vapes, so I don't really like using her. Mona's Omen buff is pretty short, her Hydra application is small, and she was power crept by TDDS 4-piece TOTM Kokomi and Freeze a very long time ago. Plus, Freeze isn't even all that relevant in the current meta right now. Also, a crap ton of solo Hydro ER requirements forcing you into Favonia's Codex or Prototype Amber, since Sterling Tales of Dragon Slayers just isn't realistic to use in most cases with how much of an energy vacuum Mona is. She has her niche use cases, like buffing up an especially large Navia nuke to name a random example, or for damage per screenshot showcases. And that's all. Right? Wrong. She will actually gain a pretty interesting new use case of Mualani, and while her Omen buff may not last for the full duration of Mualani's damage output, it will still buff a good amount to such a significant amount that it makes up for not having 100% uptime. A very nice use case indeed considering how good Mualani looks, but this is gonna need some playtesting when Mualani comes out before anything is set in stone. I still don't think that justifies picking Mona though. That is a single use, not to mention an extremely replaceable one, since Mualani is also going to have plenty of awesome burn vape teams. Plus other supports who simply have much better uptime over Mona's Omen buff. Even Candace is invited to the party, dude. Insane. So sure, Mona works well here, but does she work well enough to justify using over other options permanently? Is it worth all of that ER clunk? And won't she potentially mess up some of your Mualani vapes? I personally think that Mona's use case of Mualani is something that you should try out if you just so happen to lose to Mona. Don't treat it as something to go out of your way for. Farina also pretty much replaced Mona in a lot of damage per screenshot showcases, especially if your Farina has constellations, so there is minimal reason to aim for Mona specifically, and if it's Mualani you're interested in, well, Dehya is also going to be working pretty well with the Shark owner, and Dehya will also work pretty well with Kinich, I presume, not to mention how she buffs Natlan characters beautifully with the new 4-piece that I mentioned earlier. So, unfortunately, the Astrologer's quite an easy skip for both new and old players alike in my opinion. Most of her best teams have been power crept, and this cool new use case for her is nothing to pull your hair out over. Also, take. I don't know if it's hot or not, but Mona's old skin is far better than the new one. Same goes for Jean, by the way. New in this context feels about as new as New Super Mario Bros. Anyways. I'm not spending any time on her. Don't pick Qiqi. Yes, the physical Cloran team exists if you want to play a silly physical team, and it does end up being a surprisingly good physical team, but it is far from Cloran's best team. Ignore this unit if you care about the meta. The fact that we're getting a limited selector after such an arduously long time is flabbergasting. Like, I'm still in shock over how amazing the 5.0 livestream was, and if the Genshin team keeps up with improving the game the way that they're planning to in 5.0, we're in for an extremely delicious treat. Who knows how long Genshin Impact is going to last, in all honesty. When Honkai Impact 3rd ended, they went screw it and made a Honkai Impact 3rd Part 2. Genshin's future appears to be endless, and for all we know, we could be in for a real treat. Either way, I'm super excited for the future of this game after all this has went down, and I'll be along for the entire ride. Thank you, Genshin Impact. Hopefully this video was able to tell you which standard 5-star will be right for your account. This has been Juice, signing out, and I am overjoyed that I can finally obtain Tighnari after 2 years of not having him!